from as far as I remember, I always painted and drew. I remember doing it at infant school, and I suppose it was the only thing that I thought I could do. I suppose looking back, it's always difficult, isn't it? But looking back, I think one of the things about making paintings was that it's a thing you could do that, in a way, no one else could tell you couldn't how to do it, or you couldn't do it. There was no proper way of doing it, so I could just disappear into it and do it. And I once discussed it with a couple of friends of mine about the idea of artists, and it came up with this thing about, a very generalised thing about, there are some artists who become artists because they want to be the centre of attention. They want to project themselves into the world and be famous. And there are some artists who make art really to disappear from the world, to create another world that actually they can disappear into. And I think I was the second of those sort of artists. So I found a sort of a way of coping with lots of things by giving them a face in that other world. And I think that's always carried on, really. That's really been the motivation behind a lot of it. I mean, I went to a grammar school, but I completely hated it, and came out with 3 O-levels and an art A-level. And so I went to school. After that, I left at about 16, and I went to Walthamstow College, which is a school of art, which doesn't exist anymore. And it was a little tiny college which did NDD, and which is pre-degree, and it just started foundation, and I did 2 years foundation there. And it was a crazy time as well, because it was 63, and a lot of the blokes who were doing the NDD had come off the last couple of years of national service, and they were nuts. They'd come back from Germany and whatever, spent 2 years carrying sandbags on their back as punishment. And they were great, they were completely nuts, and I never met better people really all the time I was at art school, so it sort of spoilt me in a way. I was 17 and they were about 25, 26. And so then I went to Manchester really to and again in those days it was a kind way of getting away from the family. So, in a way they couldn't object. So I went to Manchester, and I spent 3 years in Manchester really not liking it very much, really wanted to get back to London. And when I was in Manchester, I did paint, but it was all abstract painting, very much American influenced, and I didn't get it. I really didn't get it at all. And so, in my last year there, I stopped making paintings completely and started making these sort of sculpture things. And then, by some incredible bit of luck, John Hoyland was running the postgrad at Chelsea, and I think it's because I painted all these things red and yellow, and he was painting red and yellow paintings that he liked them, and so I got a place at Chelsea to come down and do a year there, and that was good. It was when there were only about 10 people in the year, and it was at the main art college in those days, 69. And Hoyland was great. He never said anything really about painting. He talked mainly about his love life, which was pretty checkered. But he used to take us out occasionally and buy all the drinks, which I always thought was a great thing to do, and I liked him. So after art school, I was in art school a long time. I mean, 2 years foundation, 3 years what was Dip AD then, and then a year what was called higher Dip AD. So what is that? That's 6 years at art school. I've been making work now, I suppose, quite a long time, and sometimes that work has not been painting. I made sculpture and installations for about 10 years after leaving college, and I came back to making painting really in the mid-80s because I desperately wanted to make images again. I wanted to tell stories again, and somehow it seemed to me that at that point in my life I might have had some stories to tell. Before then I was very uncertain about what it is that I wanted to actually say in art, and I've never been a formalist. I've never approached art from positions of theory. In fact, I've been very anti in my own head taking up any theories about art at all. So in some senses, it's always been something about my inner experience and how that relates to the world, or how it manifests itself in the world. And painting has become, and I suppose was when I first started, like the most amazing space to do that in. Painting is the most incredible experience in terms of making things, because you start from nothing, you have nothing, and when you finish a painting, it exists in the painting. It doesn't, it's not a picture of something in the world. It is actually the world, and then it pictures the world in a weird way. And I don't think there's anything else that does that, because photography in a way is always a reflection or a dilution of the world through a chemical process. So painting, you start with sticky stuff and hairy bits of things on sticks and a blank sheet, and everything there has to be made and built. And so in a way, to be able to have stories to tell, you have to live life a bit, I think. And I think, not that I'm suggesting that I'm entering the late great phase, but I think if you manage to live long enough, there are some artists who make their best work towards the end of their lives for that reason. Of course, that's not always true. A lot of artists make their best work early on and then don't do anything again or whatever. So I also taught a lot in art schools, but I was always a VT, a visiting lecturer. I sort of avoided taking a full-time job in an art school, or it avoided me maybe because I wasn't suited to it, because I never wanted to place my loyalties above the studio. It seemed to me that the studio was the place that had most claim on me, and I saw people who took jobs in art schools, etc., suddenly becoming part of the art school, and like as if that was their life and that was where they were, and there was part of me that always resisted that. But I liked students and I liked talking about painting. But I did that for 20 odd years, and then there came a point where I was bored with my own voice, quite honestly. I'd had enough. I just, I thought, well, I don't, and also I didn't want to tell anybody anything anymore. Fuck them, in a sense. I wanted to take it back to the studio with me. As well as making big paintings, large paintings, I like making small paintings. Small paintings have a sort of intimacy, a sort of one-to-oneness, that when you make a big painting, it's automatically a stage and it becomes part of theatre. But small paintings escape that. There's a sort of one-to-one relationship. And over the last few years, I've been working on a whole, I suppose they are a series of little paintings where a lot of paint goes on that in a way is paint that you would normally throw away. I think there's something about that process of adding and adding and adding that it's like life. It's an accumulation, and you don't really know what it's going to be till it's over. I think that's very redolent of how I experience life itself. So they ended up being this series of little portraits. And I suppose, fundamentally, like, all the paintings that you make are you to some degree or another. And I suppose in some senses they are all glimpses or versions of me, but it's like through a glass darkly. It's like, at the edge of your vision. You're not actually painting yourself. And sometimes this one was much more, in a sense, I would say premeditated, but this one was much more constructed as a painting, hence the frame. And I like the idea of extending this conglomeration of paint here outwards onto the frame, like I said, it's a splatter. And I did think of it as somehow a sort of emanation, a sort of like something that he or she can't see but senses all the time. There's something there, a presence, a meaning that is always elusive, not quite graspable, but deeply significant to your life. that doesn't make it sound far too pompous. And I suppose it's that, again, because of that intimacy with painting, you can experience that, can't you? It's like looking at a Rembrandt self-portrait. I mean, it could be, a cliche, but it's not, because when you look at those paintings, you experience life. You don't experience the painting, you experience life, and you experience the whole existence of that person, and therefore as a mirror of yourself. And that is the most fantastic thing to be able to do. I don't know anything else that really does that. And not that I'm saying that these are Rembrandtian, because they're not. But I think in a curious way, there's something about that sense of mystery not solved, mystery experienced. So art isn't. Oh God, art isn't about solving problems or coming to solutions. It's an experiential thing. It's about being in it and trying to find some sort of definition of what that is for yourself. And that's difficult and hard. And a lot of people feel that they can't do that because they don't have the tools, the language, whatever. Well, forget that. It's all right. All you need to do is look at the work, look at the paintings, spend time, and just have your thoughts with them. And those thoughts are always relevant. And the artist makes the painting, hopefully, to allow those thoughts to inhabit the painting. And therefore, in a way, the descriptions of the painting are often superfluous. Then it's not a necessary part of looking at art to almost know what it is, and so again, these are paintings that, again, like some of them take maybe 6 months before I decide that that's enough. I've done it, and what often happens with these paintings is that I'll come in the studio in the morning, and they'll all be sitting there in a little row, gawping at me, and I'll suddenly think, and you just go over with a palette knife with a bit of yellow on it and just go blur, 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 and then okay, that's enough, no more now, and you go away, and the rest of the day there's this little painting in the corner of the studio which sort of winks at you, sort of inhabits your world, but you know that you've done it for the day. And so in a curious way, again, when you paint a big picture, the big picture is always shouting at you, making demands, wanting your attention, wanting to be solved. I think little pictures, they go away, they quietly sit, they wait for you to come over. I like that contrast with them. I like the idea that you can do both. And after all, essentially, I think a good painter should be able to paint anything. Anything in the world should be able to paint. And the other thing is that it's slow burn. Painting is very slow burn. I think it's very slow burn to make, and for people who don't make paintings, who don't actually go through that process, I can conceive of how difficult it is to actually, if you like, suspend enough of your worries, queries, questions, to actually see what the painting is, because it takes time and familiarity, and it's something that we don't give ourselves very much of. So I do believe that painting has a disadvantage in a way now, because everything is fast medium, everything is like got it, move on, got it, move on. The great thing about really good paintings is you just go back and back and back to them all the time, and they're constantly revisiting you. And I think you've just got to let it happen in a weird way. You've just got to stop worrying it in a curious way. That's not to say that, of course, as artists don't worry it to death quite often, but our process is a different one. But I hope the final paintings carry some of that anxiety. And again, that's the other thing I suppose about my paintings, is that yes, I think that they, in some of the paintings there is a sense of more than a sense of a sort of anxiety or a sort of fear or a losses. But again, that's without
going over the top again, I mean, that is life, isn't it? I mean, you know, no one lives their lives without those feelings, and to some extent or another, all art is about death, to me. It's not because that makes it gloomy or bad or whatever, it's because that is the nature of the final end for all of us. That is the nature of where we all go. If anything, that's the main commonality of humanity, is that we all die, and no one knows what afterwards, what happens, if anything. And I think art, for me, painting, but culture generally, is a way that we not necessarily personally live on, but the way that humanity, that sense of what that human being is on the planet, lives on and can be seen, can be read, from, you know, Egyptians to last week in New York, and that makes it incredibly important, but at the same time very sort of ordinary as well, in a way. In one sense, we make far too much of art, and on the other hand, we don't actually pay it enough real attention, and that becomes a problem, a real problem. And I think artists are somehow squashed in the middle of that problem quite often. So again, all making is in the end process, and all process is repetition. So, you know, habits and, you know, are really important. But I personally think that that one, as an artist, in a way, you have a responsibility all the time to challenge the nature of the thing you're making itself, and maybe that increases sometimes its sense of anxiety, because you are actually, if you like, calling its own bluff when you make something, and I want that to communicate in the paintings. I want that to be something of what the paintings are about. Because again, I think that is part of how we experience the world. So, you know, in a way, my paintings aren't there to reassure you about yourselves or the world, but maybe they're there so that you can share some of those feelings with it and with others, maybe, hopefully, and not feel so alone, maybe. And that sounds a bit mad in a way, with paintings which are these singular, very alone objects. But again, one of the really powerful things to me about painting is time in painting. Because when you make a painting, when you're actually making a painting, you're always in the present, because it's the brush mark, it's the end of the brush all the time that is where you are. And so the past is always there, and the future is always just behind there. And the best paintings, it seems to me, always, they hold some part of that. They hold that notion that somehow in the present all the time is the past and the possible future. And so it's this again, this one shot of, I don't know what you'd call it. I'm dubious to call it truth, because I don't quite know what that is, but it's certainly not lies, although it doesn't, although it uses all those devices to get you to that point. And again, it's one of the paradoxes of making paintings. You know, they don't have a single explanation, a single solution, a single way of making. They're complex and difficult, and they reflect everything that is complex and difficult, but when they're really good, they appear to be incredibly simple, and no problem. But it's hard to get them like that. I paint by daylight. I've got these massive skylights. For historical reasons, there's no electricity in my studio, so I come in a way, my day is programmed by the light. So in the summer I come in early, 6 o'clock, and I do 5-6 hours work, and then I leave. And in the winter I come in when it gets light, and I leave when it gets dark. I've been doing that now for years,
And the other thing is that the offshoot, in a sense, of not having electricity is that I've never listened to music in the studio. I know friends of mine who have the radio on or they listen to music. I've always found it very intrusive, and although sometimes the silence can be oppressive, and sometimes you do stand up and start acting like a madman, shouting and walking up and down. But most of the time the silence is there because that is the space in your head that the painting is filling. And what I don't want is another thing coming in and filling that space, which then I have to get through to get to the painting. So, without being digressive, if I was listening to, say, a Beethoven sonata, the painting would appear great, and then the sonata finishes and like, shit, I'm left with something that isn't the sonata, it's my painting. So in a way I'm saying, great, I want that singular experience to be the experience, and I don't want that other thing there. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the way I make paintings. And in a sense, as you can see, relatively speaking, I don't tidy my studio. About once a month I tidy my studio. But that's part of my process. The process is that all this spins out, pours out, goes out, and then it's gathered together at other times. And I don't like the idea of gathering things together until it's absolutely necessary. So that is also part of the process. And some of the paintings, I act on them very violently for short periods of time, and some of them I act very slowly for long periods of time. And that is totally dictated by the nature of the painting itself. So it's not predictable. And in a way, I like that unpredictability of the process. I don't like to feel as if I'm at the mercy of the processes. I like to feel that somehow I can stop them, control them, kick them, destroy them whenever I want, which is a conceit, but it's a necessary conceit for me. So I'm always looking for a way of actually undoing the last thing I did, and making something happen that I didn't know was going to happen. And then most of the time, of course, it comes out as the thing that you recognise as something that's going to happen, and that's great. But it always has the possibility of going somewhere that you could not tell where it would go. And that's the exciting bit. That's the really exciting bit.